Kari Lake is getting her day in court. Should she be excited about it, as it seems like she is? Let's talk about it. This is Dustin. Welcome to A Voice in the Middle. Let's get going. And hello, Internet. Welcome to Tuesday. Hope your Tuesday is going great. My name is Dustin, a registered Republican here in the great state of Arizona that doesn't drink the Kool Aid like everybody else. Well, the court hearing occurred yesterday. There was no initial ruling on the motions, but last night the judge came out and said Kari Lake can go to court for two of her proposed grievances. And that's number one. As much as the far right is trying to spin this as a victory, I want to be very clear. There were a total of 10 cases of fraud or voter irregularities. I mean, he keeps spinning what the accusation actually is. But of those 10, 8 got thrown out. There was no substantial information. There was no backing. There was nothing that the judge could rule on. The reality is, if you read the lawsuit by Kari Lake, it was a bunch of grandstanding. In fact, a majority of those 8 counts were bringing up proven disputed facts from the 2020 election. And the judge said, we're not going to have anything to do with that. But she is allowing two of the 10 claims to go to court, which at the time of this video, date hasn't been set exactly, but it's going to be sometime this week. It's going to last 2 days. There's a 2-day limit on the trial, just so we can try to get this charade over and done with. Now, maybe I'm wrong, right? There's a lot of people, a lot of my fellow Republicans, a lot of people in my precinct that say I am secretly a Democrat agent, that I am not a Republican, that I don't love America, and how can I not believe that fraud or voter disenfranchisement or whatever they want to call it occurred? And I'm going to say the same thing that I've been saying since 2020. If I'm wrong, prove it. And until you prove it, I'm going to say we don't have any proof this occurred. To me, that's just reasonable. I mean, it makes me laugh sometimes how the right is constantly turning around and saying, hey, innocent before proven guilty. You know, how the talking points against cancel culture, some of the Me Too movement, all of this was we have become this country that we are guilty until proven innocent. And yet they want us to believe all these people are guilty, and they're guilty even if we prove innocence, right? I mean, that the hypocrisy in all of it just astounds me. So Lake is going to go to court, but if you read the judge's ruling, Lake better be careful. The judge's ruling that the case can go to trial basically hinted that if this turns out to be a giant charade and a waste of the court's time, I might hold you accountable for that, Miss Lake. Because essentially the judge is saying, look, there's no evidence to prove any of this inside the motion, but the reality is you don't put all your cards on the table when you're filing these, right? It could be that Kari Lake has this giant smoking gun, and essentially that's what the judge is saying. Is saying, hey, look, I'm going to give you the opportunity to prove these allegations and prove that this actually occurred. But even the threshold the judge is putting her at is pretty substantial. So one of the areas that is going to get to go forward is that the printing issue that happened in Maricopa County and throughout the state, that basically printers weren't working properly, it wasn't printing the documents, the ballots dark enough. That number one, this was intentional. Okay, so it has to be intentional. Number two, it was specifically targeted to Republicans, which that one in and of itself, I'm not going to see how you can prove, because you don't know who's going to be showing up on election day ahead of time. I don't recall getting any phone calls or being knocked on the door saying, hey, how are you registered Republican and Democrat, or how do you plan on voting today, right? Like, this didn't occur, right? So they have to prove it's intentional. They have to prove that it was like targeted. And then it also you have to prove that it changed the outcome of the election. And what that basically means is this: someone shows up to vote, okay? They go to put their ballot in there, ballot's not working because the printer is malfunctioning. At that point, you have a few options. You can wait for them to try to get the issue resolved. You can continue trying to vote. You can put your ballot in door number 3, or you can go somewhere else to vote, right? Like, so that's essentially what's happening. So what Kari Lake has to essentially prove is that somehow people not being able to vote initially, and most of these issues, mind you, were resolved within the morning. Okay, it wasn't a full day issue. The majority of them, if not all of them, were resolved within that the a few hour time period, right? And it was fixed. So what you essentially have to prove is that there was enough voters that decided they didn't have time to vote that morning that didn't come back later to be able to cast their ballots, so their ballots weren't counted. I mean, if you look at any of the news reports and if you look at any of the Kari Lake fanatics that have been trying to find these affidavits and pushing for all this, the reality is, from what I'm seeing on message boards and comments and internally, you know, I'm seeing two, three, four cases at the most in each case of people saying I wasn't able to vote because of this. I mean, you're talking needing thousands of votes in order for this to make a difference, and maybe they're able to prove that. I mean, we're gonna have to wait and see. I from anything I'm seeing, I don't see that as being a reality, right? I don't see that as being you can prove that this occurred. In fact, a lot of independent, a lot of media groups that went out and surveyed people, even surveyed people that voted for Kari Lake, said I had problems initially, but I got my ballot in. I was able to vote, right? It was inconvenient, but I was able to vote. So I honestly don't see that going anywhere. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some big smoking gun that there's a giant whistleblower out there that can basically prove that the printers were deliberately uh, modified in every single voting location and it was intentional, and here's the paper trail to prove it. And they knew based on polling data that it was going to be 90% Republicans showing up to vote on the day of election, and so this was specifically targeted. I mean, maybe that happens. I just don't see it. But like I said, hey, if you prove me wrong, I will be the first one to say, well, I was wrong about this. I just don't see that happening. So the second area that is going to be brought up is about chain of custody. Okay, was chain of custody broken in order for the ballots that were being received and being dropped off and counted? And the judge mentioned something again in the motion that says Maricopa County policy doesn't necessarily mean it is a legal decision. In other words, Maricopa County could hold itself to these standards of this is how chain of custody occurs. But that may not be Arizona law or constitutional law. It's something decided internally within the county and dealt with within the county, which basically means if that's an internal policy and that internal policy isn't followed for some reason, there's not going to be a lot that the court can do. Now, I will say this. If it is proven that that's the case, that potentially could open up to a stay or another lawsuit, because then basically what would need to happen is it could be proven that Maricopa County failed to follow the chain of custody that they themselves outlined, and because they themselves outlined it, it pushes to other issues, and so that could be a jumpstart potentially to another lawsuit based on it. But I don't see anything coming from this initial court hearing to overturn the election whatsoever. And based on everything that the Maricopa County Recorder's Office and anyone involved has said publicly, and what people have been able to look between past elections and what's out there in the public, it honestly appears that there's a few different ways chains of custody can be handled. But the judge also put the same type of basically requirements on Lake. You have to prove that not only was chain of custody not followed, but that it potentially influenced the election, and that the ballots that didn't follow the proper chain of custody, it means that they were changed, modified, or disappeared, or additional ballots were like you have to be able to prove that just because chain of custody didn't follow, that it influenced the position of the election. And when I read through the motion on this one, it's very inconcise wording on Kelly Lake's part, on Kari Lake's part, on as far as what actually occurred or where they think the chain of custody fell apart. There's one report going out now that they're basically being able to prove that it fell apart on a single signature, that there's one piece of paper a signature is missing on, but everything else before and after adds up. And I think that's the big point here. From everything I've been able to research, is basically, yes, there may have been an area where the chain of custody fell apart and someone forgot to sign their name on a certain line on a certain piece of paper, but the chain of custody prior to them and after them, all that matches up and it still shows everything as correct. It's not showing any disparities whatsoever, just a piece of paper forgot to get signed. And let's be real, right? That should not happen, and if that happened, we need to look into it to see how that can better not happen in the future, mainly so we don't end up in situations like this. But how many times have you gone through signing a lease agreement and all of a sudden it tells you, hey, on page 17 you forgot to sign this line, so now you got to go back and do it. It's very easy for that to occur. It doesn't mean it's malicious intent, doesn't mean it was intentional. It just, a piece of paper could have been forgotten, but again, we'll have to wait and see. I just, as I look at this and the fact that the judge kind of warned Lake, hey, if it turns out this is all frivolous, you know, I'm not going to be happy about it, and you may face repercussions. Kari Lake's not going to back down. It's not going to happen. But she shouldn't be as excited and happy about this as she thinks, because the reality is, I believe this is going to come back and bite her even more, which unfortunately is going to probably antagonize her base even more, because what's going to end up being saying, what they're going to end up saying is, see, corruption. The judicial system is part of the fraud. The judicial system is part of the issue. That we're showing them the evidence and they're just not buying into it. And so I think from a legal standpoint, there is a very good chance this is going to be done and over by the end of the week. I think from a news cycle and from some of the fanatics that really buy into this, I think we may be in store for a lot more. And hopefully Lake, if she does lose the lawsuit, will tone down her rhetoric a little bit, because with some of the stuff she said at Turning Point, with some of the stuff she said at Mar-a-Lago, she's honestly lighting a mat, like she's pouring gasoline on a wood pile, and she's standing there with a match ready to light it in a very similar fashion to how Trump honestly helped push the riot to occur at Capitol Hill. It's just a reality of the situation. So we will have to wait and see. Like I said, right now, maybe I'm going to be putting out an apology video saying I was wrong and I was naive. But based on all the facts and evidence that I can see that have been presented so far, I think Kari Lake is fighting an uphill battle that she's going to lose, and I think there's a boulder coming back down from the other side that's going to hit her, and it's going to impact her even more than she thinks. But anyway, my name is Dustin. Thank you for joining me. Please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Share the video to other people you think that may be sensibly minded, would like to hear a different take besides just the far right, just digging their heads in and their heels in, saying this has to happen, and also even the far left that just dismisses it, saying there's no grievances whatsoever. Because there were some things that happened on election day. I just don't believe it was enough to influence the election. Anyway, take care. God bless. Enjoy the rest of your week. Peace.